The corridor outside the East Nursery was supposed to be sealed after dusk. Tonight, the door stood ajar by a hand's width. I stopped, noting the latch untouched, the access log blank since Vespers. Inside, a soft whimper rose once, then cut off. I waited, listening to the ventilation hum fill the gap where sound should have been. Procedure said call it in. Instinct said something had already gone wrong.
The corridor lighting dimmed automatically at 2200, shifting from full white to the softer night spectrum that reduced glare on the marble floors. The change was subtle, but the guard noticed it the way he noticed most things, without breaking stride. His boots made almost no sound. The palace had been designed that way, noise carried too easily in old stone. The East Nursery wing should have been inert by now. No foot traffic, no staff rotations. The last scheduled movement ended at 1945 when the night nurse completed her check and sealed the corridor. He remembered signing off on it himself. That was why the door registered before anything else. It wasn't open in the obvious sense, no wide breach, no careless swing, just a narrow gap, no more than 3 fingers wide, enough to catch light where there should have been none. The seal strip along the frame reflected faintly, broken. He slowed, then stopped. The air near the doorway felt different, warmer. Nursery systems ran independently, climate-controlled for a child's comfort. The warmth leaked out in a thin ribbon, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and linen detergent. He did not touch the door. Instead, his eyes moved to the access panel set into the wall. The indicator light glowed steady, amber, standby, not breached, not forced. That was wrong. He angled his wrist and brought the internal display online. The interface responded immediately, projecting a narrow column of data across his vision. Door status, closed. Last authorized access, 1942. Clearance level, medical staff, night rotation. Time since last entry, 2 hours, 18 minutes. He checked the physical latch again. It was intact, no scoring on the metal, no pressure marks along the edge. Whoever opened it had done so cleanly, with full mechanical compliance, and yet the door was not closed. The guard felt the first tightening at the base of his neck. Not fear, not yet, but the recognition of deviation. Palaces ran on deviation analysis. Every incident report he had ever written began that way. He shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself so the corridor camera behind him would catch his stance without revealing the door itself. Routine posture, nothing that would flag central monitoring. From inside the nursery came a sound, soft, interrupted. A child's voice did not echo the way adult voices did. It absorbed into the room, bounced off fabric and curved surfaces, never quite reaching full volume. This one rose just enough to register, a thin, breathless whimper, then stopped. Not resolved, cut off. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the ventilation seemed louder by comparison, a low mechanical sigh threading through the walls. The guard did not move for several seconds. His training ran parallel to his senses, cataloging possibilities. Night terrors, medical intervention, a restless child settling, all plausible, all accounted for in protocol. But none of them aligned with an unsealed door and a dormant access panel. He keyed his internal recorder to passive, marking the time, 22:03. He took one step closer, careful not to cast a shadow through the gap. The light inside was low, nursery dim, amber against pale walls. He could see the edge of a shelving unit, the curve of a rug. No movement. His hand hovered near the comm control, but did not activate it. Calling this in would initiate a cascade, verification, authorization, supervisory presence, time-consuming by design.
He leaned forward slightly, listening again. Nothing. The guard exhaled slowly through his nose and straightened. The rules were clear, so was the corridor. He stood between them, aware that whatever came next would be recorded, reviewed, and judged long after the moment passed. He reached for the access panel, fingers brushing the surface, then paused. From inside the nursery, something shifted. Not a sound this time, a change in pressure, barely perceptible, as if a presence had moved where it should have not been. He withdrew his hand. He stepped back instead, increasing the distance by half a meter, giving himself a wider frame of reference. Training emphasized perspective before action. He scanned the corridor again, left to right. No shadows out of place, no reflected movement on the polished floor. The nearest junction lay 30 meters away, empty. He toggled his display to System Overlay and pulled the corridor map into view. The nursery wing was a controlled spur, single entry, single exit. No service access from this side, no redundancy, which meant the only way in or out was the door in front of him. He brought up the personnel roster without opening a channel. Medical staff assigned tonight, 1 nurse, 1 aide, both accounted for in the West Wing an hour ago. Security rotation, unchanged. No overrides logged, no supervisory clearance issued. The absence pressed in on him. Systems were meant to fail loudly. Silent failure was a different category altogether. He lowered his head slightly, bringing his ear closer to the gap without touching it. The warmth was more pronounced now. He could hear fabric settling, a faint shift like clothing brushing against upholstery, too deliberate to be ambient. His jaw tightened just enough to register. Protocol dictated a call, immediate escalation to duty command, await response, maintain position, observe only. He initiated the channel. "Post 3, he said quietly. His voice was level, professional. "Requesting status verification on East Nursery Wing access." There was a pause, short but not instant. "Post 3, stand by, checking logs." The guard kept his eyes on the door. The gap had not changed, still narrow, still wrong. "Logs show no active authorization. Door reads secure. Advise you maintain position. Supervisor en route." Maintain position. He acknowledged with a brief confirmation and cut the channel. The words settled into the space between him and the door, inadequate. Supervisor en route meant minutes, possibly more depending on clearance and internal routing. He calculated distances automatically, mapping footsteps through corridors he knew as well as his own quarters. Another sound came from inside the nursery. Not a cry this time, a breath drawn too sharply, as if someone had startled. The guard's hand curled slowly, then relaxed. He adjusted his stance again, this time angling his body toward the door, a subtle shift that would not trigger an alert, but placed him closer. He glanced once at the corridor camera indicator, still steady, no remote focus change. Central had not zoomed in yet. He spoke softly toward the opening, not a command, not a question. "Royal Guard, if anyone is inside, respond." The words disappeared into the room without answer. Silence returned, denser than before, the kind that suggested listening. He waited 10 seconds, then another 5, each one stretched thin. The supervisor's footsteps were not yet audible. No radio update followed. The guard reached up and disengaged the passive recorder, switching to full capture. The system chimed once in his ear, confirmation. He placed his palm flat against the wall beside the door, feeling the vibration of the building, the steady hum of systems meant to ensure safety. All of them assumed compliance. All of them assumed good faith. His eyes dropped to the latch again, intact, untouched, waiting. He could still stop. He could still hold position, let procedure take its course. Whatever was happening inside would be addressed within framework, with witnesses and authority. But frameworks did not account for warmth leaking into a cold corridor, or for doors that said one thing and showed another, or for the absence of a child's sound where it should have been constant, irregular, alive. He moved closer until the gap was directly in front of him. Inside, the nursery light flickered once, then steadied. That was new. The guard inhaled, slow and controlled. His hand rose, not to the panel, but to the door itself. He did not touch it yet. He simply measured the distance, the force required, the line he would cross. Behind him, somewhere down the corridor, a radio crackled, distant, indistinct. He did not turn. The moment held suspended between instruction and instinct as the door remained open just enough to invite a decision.
The guard did not touch the door. Instead, he shifted his weight back again, forcing distance between impulse and action. Silence required context. In his line of work, sound was only useful when it behaved as expected. A child in a palace nursery at night produced a predictable range of noise, breathing, movement against sheets, occasional murmurs. Total absence was not calm, it was deviation. He tilted his head, listening past the obvious. The ventilation system pushed air through ceiling vents in a steady, measured cycle. Somewhere deeper in the structure, water moved through pipes. The building was alive with controlled motion. The nursery, by contrast, felt contained, as if wrapped. He checked the time again. 22:05. The whimper he had heard replayed in his memory, not emotionally, but analytically. Duration, less than a second. Volume, low, unamplified. Directional origin, center left of the room, near the cot. It had not resolved naturally. He lowered his gaze to the floor just inside the doorway. The light angle revealed a faint distortion in the rug fibers, a subtle sweep where something heavier than a child had shifted weight recently. The pattern did not match routine staff movement. Too narrow, too deliberate. He activated his throat mic without opening a channel, recording only. Auditory anomaly confirmed, he murmured. No subsequent vocalization. He waited. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The nursery remained still. His breathing slowed further, syncing with the measured pace drilled into him during close-quarters watch. Panic altered tempo. Calm preserved detail. A thought surfaced, not as speculation, but as inventory. The child's age, just under 4, old enough to cry loudly when distressed, old enough to stop crying when instructed to remain quiet. Instruction implied presence. The guard felt the corridor temperature cool slightly as the climate system compensated for the open door. The adjustment was automatic, slow. Machines responded to conditions without judgment. He glanced once more at the access panel. Still amber, still standby. The system insisted nothing was wrong. He brought up the internal nursery feed, not video but environmental telemetry. Heart rate monitor, inactive. Sleep band, offline. That was not unusual during night adjustments. Devices were often removed to prevent tangling. It explained nothing and everything at once. Post 3 came a low transmission in his ear. Supervisor delayed. Clearance conflict at Central. Hold. Hold. The word settled poorly. Clearance conflict meant someone with authority was already touching the situation, remotely if not physically. That reduced transparency, not risk. He acknowledged again, clipped, professional. The guard took one step closer, just enough that the edge of the doorframe brushed his shoulder. The warmth was stronger now. He could smell something faint beneath the detergent, metallic, almost imperceptible, like a coin warmed in a palm. He leaned in and spoke again, quieter this time. "Child," he said, a single word, neutral, not a command. No response. He waited longer than before. 30 seconds? 40. In that span, he imagined the paperwork that would follow if he crossed the threshold without authorization. Statements, reviews, the careful language of justification. He had written enough of them for others to know how they read. Another sound reached him then. Not from inside the nursery. From behind. Footsteps measured approaching at a controlled pace. Not hurried, not covert. Someone confident enough to be seen. The guard straightened slightly, but did not turn away from the door. Peripheral vision caught a dark shape resolving into uniform. A senior aide. Palace administration, not security. The aide stopped a respectful distance away. "You're early on this wing," he said quietly. The guard kept his eyes forward. "The door is unsealed." "Yes, that's being addressed." The guard turned then, slowly, bringing the aide into full view. The man's expression was composed, almost bored. His badge clearance glinted under the corridor light, high tier, administrative gold. "By whom?" asked the guard. The aide inclined his head slightly, a gesture that suggested reassurance without offering information. "Medical directive, temporary." "There's no record," the guard said. His tone did not change. He did not raise his voice. "There will be," the aide replied. "These things lag." He studied him. No visible agitation, no signs of exertion. The aide's shoes were clean, soles dry. He had not come from the nursery. "Did you hear the child?" the guard asked. The aide's eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the door. "Children make noise. Then they stop." Silence stretched between them. The aide smiled faintly, the expression thin. "You're very thorough." "It's my post." "Yes, and this situation is under control." The aide took a half-step closer, careful to remain outside the guard's immediate space. "You've done your job by reporting it. Now let it proceed." Proceed implied momentum already in motion. The guard turned back to the door. The gap had not changed. The room beyond remained still, unnaturally contained. Protocol requires a security presence during medical intervention. And protocol allows administrative override, the aide countered smoothly, which has been exercised, without physical confirmation. Another pause. The aide's smile faded, replaced with something firmer. "You are approaching insubordination." The guard nodded once, acknowledging the fact, not the threat. His attention returned to the nursery. He could feel the decision narrowing, options collapsing inward. "Who is inside?" asked the guard. "That's not necessary information." Necessary was a flexible word in the palace, often bent by rank. The guard shifted his stance, placing his body squarely between the aide and the door. Not aggressive, protective, a position so ingrained it required no thought. "I'm not leaving," he said. The aide exhaled, controlled. "If you delay this, consequences will follow." The guard did not respond. He was listening again, filtering out the aide's presence, the corridor noise, the weight of authority pressing from behind. Inside the nursery, something moved. Not subtle this time. Fabric brushed against wood. A chair leg scraped softly, corrected immediately, as if whoever caused it realized the mistake too late. The aide heard it too. His eyes snapped to the door. The guard moved. He reached for the panel, not to open the door, but to override the status display. His fingers worked quickly, entering a limited diagnostic request. The system resisted for a half-second, then complied. Door sensors showed manual suppression. Not a fault, a command. The guard straightened. "Step back," the aide said sharply. The guard did not look at him. "There is an unauthorized presence with sensor suppression in a royal nursery. The child has gone silent. I am escalating. You are exceeding your authority. I am executing my duty." The guard placed his hand on the door at last. The surface was warm under his palm. Behind him, the aide's voice rose sharper now, edged with command. "Do not open that door." The guard closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, not in hesitation, but in alignment. Training, instinct, the child's silence weighing heavier than rank. He applied pressure. The latch resisted, then disengaged with a muted mechanical click. The door began to open.
The door opened only as far as the guard allowed. Controlled, measured, enough to break the seal without flooding the corridor with light. Warm air spilled out, carrying the sterile scent of disinfectant, layered with something older, wood polish, fabric, the faint sweetness of a child's shampoo. The nursery was dim. Night lamps cast low amber pools along the walls. The cot stood where it should have, rails up, blanket folded back with care. Too much care. The guard scanned the room without stepping inside. His eyes tracked in practiced arcs, floor, furniture, corners, ceiling. No immediate threat, no raised voices, no visible child. Behind him, the aide spoke again, clipped. "You've made your point. Close it." The guard ignored him, his attention fixed on the terminal mounted discreetly near the cot. Nursery systems ran parallel to central security, redundant by design. He reached in and brought the screen to life. Access history populated instantly, clean lines, standard entries, and then a break. At 2141, a timestamp skipped. Not delayed, not corrupted, missing. The guard leaned closer, narrowing the display. The system did not flag the absence. It flowed around it, smoothing the gap as if it had never existed. He felt the shift internally, the moment when suspicion became confirmation. Behind the omission lay intent. He stepped into the room fully now, placing himself between the cot and the door. The floor was warm beneath his boots. The rug fibers showed disturbance near the far wall, a shallow crescent where weight had pivoted. "Who authorized suppression?" he asked, not turning. No answer. He brought up the deeper audit, something guards were discouraged from using unless absolutely necessary. It required layered credentials, each action logged for later review. His clearance was sufficient, barely. The system hesitated longer this time, then opened. Lines of code resolved into human-readable entries, overrides, manual edits, a cascade of permissions stacked just long enough to erase a record, then withdrawn. One name appeared repeatedly in the metadata, not as an active user, but as a validating authority. The aide's clearance. The guard straightened slowly. "You altered the log," he said. "That's a strong accusation," the aide replied from the doorway. He had not entered. He remained just outside the threshold, careful. "Administrative cleanup, medical privacy." "You removed a time, not a name, not an action, a moment." The aide's jaw tightened. "Close the door." The guard turned then, meeting his eyes. "Where is the child?" Silence answered him. He looked back to the cot. The pillow was indented, still holding the faint impression of a head that had rested there recently, too recently to have been moved through official channels. He keyed his recorder again. "Logbook anomaly confirmed," he said quietly. "Deliberate temporal deletion, possible concealment." The aide stepped forward at last, crossing into the room. "You are exceeding." The guard raised a hand, stopping him without looking. "Do not come closer." The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, the silence heavier. "Last chance," the aide said. His voice had lost its smoothness. "Stand down." The guard's gaze returned to the terminal. He scrolled once more, deeper this time, searching for the edges of the cut, and found them. The deletion was precise but not perfect. It left traces the way clean cuts always did, residual flags, orphaned processes waiting to be resolved. The guard followed them methodically, each step narrowing the window. At 2141, a secondary system had registered load. Not a door, not a camera, a service corridor sensor. The guard's eyes lifted to the far wall. He noticed then what he had missed before. The paneling seam, hairline thin, disguised in the grain of the wood. A design feature from an older palace iteration meant for staff movement, not protection. "You used the service access," he said, not turning. No answer. He brought up the deeper audit, something guards were discouraged from using unless absolutely necessary. It required layered credentials, each action logged for later review. His clearance was sufficient, barely. The system hesitated longer this time, then opened. Lines of code resolved into human-readable entries, overrides, manual edits, a cascade of permissions stacked just long enough to erase a record, then withdrawn. One name appeared repeatedly in the metadata, not as an active user, but as a validating authority. The aide's clearance. The guard straightened slowly. "You altered the log," he said. "That's a strong accusation," the aide replied from the doorway. He had not entered. He remained just outside the threshold, careful. "Administrative cleanup, medical privacy." "You removed a time, not a name, not an action, a moment." The aide's jaw tightened. "Close the door." The guard turned then, meeting his eyes. "Where is the child?" Silence answered him. He looked back to the cot. The pillow was indented, still holding the faint impression of a head that had rested there recently, too recently to have been moved through official channels. He keyed his recorder again. "Logbook anomaly confirmed," he said quietly. "Deliberate temporal deletion, possible concealment." The aide stepped forward at last, crossing into the room. "You are exceeding." The guard raised a hand, stopping him without looking. "Do not come closer." The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, the silence heavier. "Last chance," the aide said. His voice had lost its smoothness. "Stand down." The guard's gaze returned to the terminal. He scrolled once more, deeper this time, searching for the edges of the cut, and found them. The deletion was precise, but not perfect. It left traces the way clean cuts always did, residual flags, orphaned processes waiting to be resolved. The guard followed them methodically, each step narrowing the window. At 2141, a secondary system had registered load. Not a door, not a camera, a service corridor sensor. The guard's eyes lifted to the far wall. He noticed then what he had missed before. The paneling seam, hairline thin, disguised in the grain of the wood. A design feature from an older palace iteration meant for staff movement, not protection. "You used the service access," he said, not turning. No answer. He brought up the deeper audit, something guards were discouraged from using unless absolutely necessary. It required layered credentials, each action logged for later review. His clearance was sufficient, barely. The system hesitated longer this time, then opened. Lines of code resolved into human-readable entries, overrides, manual edits, a cascade of permissions stacked just long enough to erase a record, then withdrawn. One name appeared repeatedly in the metadata, not as an active user, but as a validating authority. The aide's clearance. The guard straightened slowly. "You altered the log," he said. "That's a strong accusation," the aide replied from the doorway. He had not entered. He remained just outside the threshold, careful. "Administrative cleanup, medical privacy." "You removed a time, not a name, not an action, a moment." The aide's jaw tightened. "Close the door." The guard turned then, meeting his eyes. "Where is the child?" Silence answered him. He looked back to the cot.
The pillar was indented, still holding the faint impression of a head that had rested there recently, too recently to have been moved through official channels. He keyed his recorder again. "Logbook anomaly confirmed," he said quietly. "Deliberate temporal deletion, possible concealment." The aide stepped forward at last, crossing into the room. "You are exceeding." The guard raised a hand, stopping him without looking. "Do not come closer." The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, the silence heavier. "Last chance," the aide said. His voice had lost its smoothness. "Stand down." The guard's gaze returned to the terminal. He scrolled once more, deeper this time, searching for the edges of the cut, and found them. The deletion was precise but not perfect. It left traces the way clean cuts always did, residual flags, orphaned processes waiting to be resolved. The guard followed them methodically, each step narrowing the window. At 2141, a secondary system had registered load. Not a door, not a camera, a service corridor sensor. The guard's eyes lit.
The service corridor fed into a wider junction where the palace's unseen systems converged. The temperature dropped several degrees, the air drier, carrying the faint electrical smell of conduit heat and old stone. The guard slowed as he reached the corner, letting the building settle around him before he moved again. His internal channel was no longer quiet. "Repeat last. Post 3, confirm your location. Hold position immediately." He filtered the noise down to a single line, routing command through his left ear only. His pace remained steady. Running invited mistakes. The child's whimper had been brief, strained, not panic, controlled silence again. He keyed the channel. "Post 3 to Central," he said. "I am in service access below East Nursery. Unauthorized transfer in progress. Administrative clearance implicated." A pause followed, longer this time. "Post 3, came the reply, carefully measured. "You are ordered to disengage and await armed escort." The words were calm, official, too calm. "Negative," he said. "Child audible, movement recent." "Stand by," Central replied. "This is being handled at a higher level." Higher level meant distance. Distance meant delay. He reached another junction, this one marked only by a maintenance glyph half worn from the wall. The service map overlaid his vision automatically, routes branching like veins. One path led deeper into the service wing, another climbed toward administrative offices. He paused, listening. Footsteps echoed faintly to the right, adult cadence, one set, not running, confident. He turned left instead, choosing the longer route that curved beneath the wing. It would intercept without confrontation if his timing held. "Post 3, Central said, again more firmly now. "You are operating outside authorization. Identify your supervisor." "I am identifying a breach," he replied. Silence followed, not technical, deliberate. The corridor narrowed, forcing him to angle his shoulders. His hand brushed the stone wall, cold now, the palace's older bones closer here. He could hear his own breathing, steady, controlled. He kept it that way. Another sound drifted back to him, a soft intake of breath, too small to belong to an adult. The child again, closer now. He increased his pace slightly. "Post 3, came a new voice, senior command, familiar. "This is Commander Hale. You are to stop where you are." The guard halted, not because of the order, but because the passage ahead opened into a crossway flooded with brighter light. He waited at the edge, unseen. "Sir," he replied, "I have confirmation of unauthorized child movement, logs altered, administrative clearance misused." "That is not your determination to make," Hale said. "Withdraw." The guard closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, but in calculation. Hale was disciplined, procedural. He would protect the institution first, the people within it second, unless forced otherwise. "I am with the child's signal. Silence is being enforced." The channel went quiet again. In that quiet, a door opened ahead. Metal, not wood, service grade. Someone spoke softly, too low to hear words. The guard moved. He advanced to the edge of the crossway and looked in. The service wing opened into a functional space stripped of ornament, gray walls, exposed piping, utility lighting that hummed faintly. At the far end, a secondary service lift stood open. A man was stepping inside, his back to the corridor. In his arms, wrapped too tightly in a blanket, was the child. The guard did not shout. He stepped forward, boots striking the floor with purpose now, no longer concealed. "Stop," he said, not raised, absolute. His man turned sharply, not the aide. This one wore maintenance gray, clearance band visible at his wrist. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He shifted his grip instinctively, angling the child away. The child did not cry. Her face was tense, eyes open, mouth pressed shut, as if she had been told not to make a sound. The lift chimed softly, doors beginning to close. The guard moved faster, covering the distance in long strides. He reached the threshold just as the doors met resistance against his arm. The safety sensor stalled them. "Step back," the man said, breath quickening. "This is authorized." "By whom?" the guard asked, already reaching for the child. He hesitated. That fraction of a second was enough. The guard took hold, firm but careful, shifting the child's weight into his own arms. She was lighter than expected, too still. Her body was warm, trembling slightly. The man swore under his breath and reached for his comm. The guard blocked him with his shoulder, forcing space. "Post 3 to Central," the guard said aloud now. "Child recovered in service wing. Unauthorized personnel detained." The channel erupted. "Hold position. Security en route. Commander Hale." The guard ignored it, focusing instead on the child. He adjusted the blanket, loosening it enough that she could breathe freely. Her eyes flicked up at his face, searching. He did not smile. He simply nodded once, steady, course. "It's all right," he said quietly. Not reassurance, orientation. Footsteps thundered from multiple directions now, security response, converging late but inevitable. The man backed away, hands raised slightly, already recalculating his story. Commander Hale's voice cut through the channel again, sharper this time. "Post 3, you have exceeded your authority." "Yes, sir," the guard replied. He shifted his stance, placing his body fully between the child and everyone else as guards flooded the wing. Weapons remained holstered. Tension filled the space instead. Hale arrived moments later, face set, eyes moving quickly, from the child to the maintenance man to the guard. "This will be reviewed," Hale said. The guard nodded again. "I've recorded everything." Hale's jaw tightened. He looked at the child, then away. "Medical," Hale ordered. "Now." As the child was gently transferred to a medic's arms, the guard felt the weight lift from his own. Only then did he become aware of the pressure building elsewhere, consequences assembling, paperwork forming, authority preparing its response. He stood at attention as protocol finally caught up. The chain of command had reasserted itself, but it had come after the fact.
The medical wing was kept deliberately cool. Not cold, never cold, but several degrees below the ceremonial spaces, a controlled environment meant to slow heart rates and steady hands. The guard stood just outside the treatment room, posture straight, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes forward. He had not been dismissed. Through the glass panel, he could see the child on the examination bed. Small, wrapped now in a fresh blanket, patterned with muted stars. A medic adjusted sensors with practiced care, speaking softly, voice low enough not to carry. No visible injuries. That fact settled nothing. Commander Hale stood 2 paces away, angled so that his body blocked any clear line of sight between the guard and the child. It was not confrontational. It was administrative instinct, contained the variables. "You should not have pursued," Hale said quietly. The guard did not turn his head. The child's routine was broken. That is not justification. It was indication. Hale exhaled through his nose. You're assigning meaning after the fact. The guard finally looked at him. No, sir, before. Hale held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. Walk me through it, chronologically. The guard complied, not with emotion, with timestamps. The child's medical schedule includes a night check at 19:30. After that, uninterrupted rest. Any vocalization after 2100 is logged and reviewed. Tonight, there was one sound at 22:03, then silence. Hale's brow furrowed slightly. Children fall asleep. They also breathe audibly, move, adjust, especially when unwell. He paused, then added, "Tonight was a medication window." Hale turned back to him. "Explain." Antipyretic dosage administered at 19:30. Effect taper begins around 21:45. Mild discomfort expected. Normally results in restless sleep or crying. Hale glanced through the glass again. The medic was checking pupil response now. Light soft but direct. "So silence was abnormal," Hale said. "Yes, sir." Hale said nothing for several seconds. The hum of medical equipment filled the space between them. "The logs?" Hale asked. "Altered to remove the window," the guard said. "Not the action, the moment." Hale's jaw set. "You're suggesting premeditation. I'm stating sequence." The door to the treatment room opened briefly as another medic entered, then closed again. The child shifted slightly on the bed, a small movement, uncoordinated but voluntary. The guard's shoulders eased a fraction. Not relief, confirmation of life, of presence. Hale noticed. He did not comment. "You know what happens next," Hale said. "Yes, sir." "There will be inquiry." "Yes, sir." "Your conduct will be reviewed independently of outcome." The guard nodded once. "Understood." Hale studied him, weighing something unspoken. "Are you certain about the schedule?" The guard met his eyes again. "I sign off on it every night." The inquiry began before dawn. The guard was escorted, not restrained but guided, to a secondary briefing room adjacent to internal affairs. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single overhead panel that cast even light without shadow, designed to remove atmosphere, designed to focus attention. He took his seat when instructed. He did not remove his uniform. Across the table sat two figures, one from security oversight, one from palace administration, both senior, both composed. A recorder light blinked on. "State your name and post," the oversight officer said. He did. "Describe your actions beginning at 2200. He did, again. This time without Commander Hale present. He spoke of the door, the sound, the silence, the gap in the log, the service access, the child's schedule. He did not speculate. He did not accuse. When he finished, the administrative official folded their hands. "You exceeded protocol." "Yes." "You ignored direct orders." "Yes." "You forced entry into a restricted nursery and pursued an authorized transfer." The guard's eyes lifted slightly. The transfer was not authorized. It carried administrative clearance, without physical presence, without record, during a known vulnerability window. The oversight officer leaned back. "You're suggesting authority misuse. I'm documenting it." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, deliberate. The administrative official spoke again. "You are aware that senior clearance permits discretion." "Yes." "And that discretion may include actions not immediately visible to security personnel." "Yes." "Then why intervene?" The guard did not answer immediately. He lowered his gaze to the table, not in submission, but in precision, choosing the correct frame. Because discretion does not negate consequence, and because the child was removed from her scheduled protection without documentation. The oversight officer exchanged a glance with the administrator. "And if the child had not been harmed?" the administrator asked. The guard looked up. She was silenced. The words settled heavily in the room. "That is not proof of harm," the administrator said. "No," the guard agreed. It is proof of intent. The recorder hummed quietly. You are aware, the administrator continued, that this institution cannot function if individual guards act on instinct over command. Yes, and yet you did. Yes. Another pause. The oversight officer leaned forward. If placed in the same situation again, same information, same orders, what would you do? The guard answered without hesitation, the same thing. The administrator closed her folder. Then we are done for now. The recorder clicked off. As the guard was escorted out, he caught a glimpse down the corridor, medical staff moving, purposeful but calm. The palace had resumed its rhythm. Behind closed doors, authority would reassert itself. Reports would be edited. Language would soften edges. But somewhere in the medical wing, a child slept, restless now, but alive, monitored, audible. The guard returned to his post an hour later. The schedule was updated. This time, nothing was missing.
The palace did not acknowledge tension. It absorbed it. By mid-morning, the corridors had returned to their measured cadence, staff moving with quiet efficiency, aides exchanging low voices, guards rotating posts with practiced neutrality. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was always the goal. The guard resumed duty at the perimeter of the residential wing, a different post than the night before, but close enough to feel the same systems humming beneath the floors. His uniform had been inspected and returned, no visible mark of reprimand, no commendation either. He accepted the silence as provisional. At 10:47, the irregularity surfaced. It came not as an alarm, but as absence. The guard was running a routine environmental sweep, standard procedure after any overnight incident, though officially this one was still under review. He cycled through feeds at a steady pace, corridor cameras, access points, internal sensors, all green, all nominal, until one wasn't. Camera E17, mounted above the junction leading to the service wing, showed a static frame. Not black, not error-coded, frozen. The timestamp in the corner advanced normally. The image did not. He slowed his scan and isolated the feed. The picture showed an empty corridor, light pooling evenly across the stone floor. No blur, no artifacting. Too clean. A freeze that clean required intervention. He cross-checked the adjacent cameras. E16 and E18 were live, angles overlapping slightly. Both showed movement, staff passing, a cart rolling through. On E17, nothing moved at all. The guard felt the familiar tightening return, sharper this time. Not suspicion, recognition. He tagged the feed and pulled diagnostics. The system responded immediately, reporting optimal function. No packet loss, no power fluctuation, no fault. He requested a manual refresh. The image did not change. "Control," he said quietly into his comm. "I'm seeing a static feed on E17. Request verification." A brief pause. "Stand by," Control replied. The guard did not look away from the screen. The static image showed a reflection in the polished wall panel, a faint distortion that should have shifted as light changed. It hadn't. Control came back on. "We're seeing live data on our end." The guard frowned slightly. "Negative," he said. "The timestamp is live. The image is not." Another pause, longer. "Rebooting camera now," Control said. The feed flickered once, white noise, a brief smear of motion, then resolved into live video. A guard was visible in the corridor now, walking through the frame, the illusion of normalcy restored. "Feed appears stable," Control said. The guard did not respond immediately. He rewound the buffer. The system allowed only a limited retrospective view. He scrubbed back 3 minutes, 5. At 10:41, the image froze. At 10:43, the timestamp resumed movement without visual change. 2 minutes unaccounted for. He marked it silently. "Control," he said, "log the interruption. It's already noted as a minor glitch. Upgrade it," the guard said. "Manual suppression suspected." There was a hesitation on the line. On what basis? The guard kept his eyes on the feed. "This corridor connects to the service wing." Silence. "I'll escalate," finally, Control said. The guard ended the channel and stood still, letting the corridor settle around him. The palace was awake now. Noise existed again. Footsteps, distant voices, the muted clatter of service carts. And yet, for 2 minutes, a corridor leading away from a child's nursery had been made invisible. Again. He moved toward the junction in question, not hurried, not delayed. His boots echoed softly as he walked, the sound grounding him in the present. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and ozone, the byproduct of constant filtration. When he reached the camera's physical mount, he stopped beneath it and looked up. The housing was intact, no scoring, no tampering marks. It had not been touched by hand. He raised his wrist display and initiated a local scan. The camera responded normally, cycling through diagnostic pings. But the metadata told a different story. At 10:41, the feed had accepted an external command, not to shut down, not to blur, to hold. Hold commands were rarely used. They preserved visual continuity during sensitive operations, royal movements, private transits. They required senior clearance and were supposed to be paired with a formal notice. There was none. He pulled the authorization string. The same validating authority appeared as before. Administrative gold. The guard closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in fatigue, but in containment. 2 data points were no longer coincidence, they were pattern. A footstep sounded behind him. He turned to see Commander Hale approaching, posture rigid, expression carefully neutral. He had been summoned then. "You flagged the feed," Hale said. "Yes, sir." Hale looked up at the camera, then back at the guard. "Control says it was resolved." "It was corrected, not explained." Hale's jaw worked once. "You're seeing intent where there may be none." "I'm seeing repetition," the guard said. "Same corridor, same authority." Hale was silent for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "You are aware of how this looks?" "Yes, sir." "It looks like you are pursuing a narrative." "I'm documenting a system failure," the guard said evenly, "one that aligns with an earlier breach involving a child." Hale glanced down the corridor, ensuring they were alone. "This palace survives on discretion, and children survive on protection." The words were not defiant, they were factual. Hale studied him, then sighed quietly. "You're making this difficult." "I know." Another pause. Then Hale nodded almost imperceptibly. "Submit a formal anomaly report. Only the facts." "That's what I've been doing." Hale's mouth tightened, but he did not argue. "You're dismissed." The guard returned to his post. By afternoon, the anomaly report had been downgraded in priority, language adjusted. Brief interruption, no operational impact. The guard read the amended version and signed acknowledgement. He did not amend his memory. That evening, as the light shifted again and the palace prepared for night protocol, the guard checked the nursery wing personally. The door was sealed, the access panel steady green, the cameras live. Inside, the child's breathing was audible on the monitor, uneven but present. The palace appeared intact, but somewhere in its systems, someone had learned that silence could be engineered and that one guard had noticed. That knowledge lingered, waiting.
The authorization appeared at 1912. The guard noticed it because it arrived without movement. He was reviewing the evening transition logs from his station near the residential wing. posture relaxed but attention precise. The palace shifted tones at this hour, voices softened, footsteps spaced out, systems prepared for night posture. Entries populated the log in expected clusters, staff clearances, security rotations, environmental adjustments. Then one line inserted itself cleanly between them. Clearance validated. Senior Administrative Tier. Location, East Residential Access. Physical presence not confirmed. The guard stared at the last line longer than the rest. Physical presence was not optional. It was the anchor that kept authority attached to reality. Without it, a clearance was a suggestion masquerading as command. He expanded the entry. The metadata unfolded in crisp layers. Time, access scope, duration. 5 minutes. Narrow permissions. Enough to open doors. Enough to suppress feeds. No biometric confirmation. No escort assignment. He felt the now familiar tightening at the base of his neck. The pattern was tightening too. He flagged the entry internally, then cross-referenced it with corridor activity. No movement recorded. No staff passing through. The camera feeds showed empty stone and steady light. Authority had moved without a body. He keyed his comm, routing to control. "I'm seeing a senior clearance without physical confirmation," he said, requesting verification. Control responded quickly, too quickly. "That clearance is valid." "Confirm presence," the guard said. A pause. "We're not showing any biometric tag in the area." "Then the clearance should fail," the guard replied. It didn't. Silence followed. Not technical, political. "Who validated it?" the guard asked. Hesitation at control. "Administrative office." "Which one?" "Stand by." The guard waited, eyes still on the log. 5 minutes elapsed. The clearance expired cleanly, as if it had never been there. Control returned. "Validation routed through central administration, above our visibility." Above visibility meant above accountability. The guard acknowledged and closed the channel. He sat still for several seconds, letting the implications settle into something usable. An authority that could act without presence could not be intercepted the usual way. No footsteps to follow, no doors to watch, only effects. He rose and began a manual sweep, not of corridors, but of systems. He checked nursery status first, all nominal. Door sealed, cameras live, audio feed steady. The child's breathing registered softly through the monitor, uneven but calm. He moved on. Service wing access logs showed nothing unusual. Environmental controls steady, no alerts. And yet, 5 minutes of power had been exercised somewhere. He returned to the clearance entry and pulled its validation chain. The same signature appeared again, abstracted, indirect, insulated. Administrative gold without a face. The guard felt the subtle shift in his posture. This was no longer about a single incident or a single child. It was about a mechanism that allowed decisions to occur without friction. He documented the entry carefully. Time, scope, absence. Then he waited. Waiting did not take long. At 1940, Commander Hale approached from the far end of the corridor, pace measured, expression unreadable. He stopped beside the guard station, not across from it, an intentional choice. "You're tracking clearances now," Hale said. "I'm tracking anomalies," the guard replied. Hale looked at the display. He did not ask permission. "This one?" "Yes, sir." Hale exhaled slowly. "You're pushing into administrative space." "I'm staying in my lane," the guard replied. "This clearance intersected with a protected zone." Hale's jaw tightened. "There are processes you're not privy to." "Then they shouldn't touch the nursery," the guard replied.
Silence stretched between them. The palace's evening hum filled the gap. "You need to understand something," Hale said quietly. "Not every action involving the royal family is meant to be visible. I understand discretion. I don't understand invisibility." Hale studied him, weighing candor against caution. "There are internal pressures, political ones, decisions made to prevent larger consequences. And the child?" Hale looked away. "The child is a factor." "A factor," the guard repeated. Hale turned back, irritation flickering before being smoothed away. "You're close to the line." "I crossed it last night." "Yes," Hale said, "and you're still here." The guard met his gaze. "So is the system that allowed it." Another pause, this one longer. "You're not wrong," Hale said, "but you're not positioned to fix it." "I don't need to fix it. I need to slow it down." Hale almost smiled at that. Almost. "You're going to keep watching." "Yes, sir." "And reporting?" "Yes, sir." Hale nodded once. "Then do it cleanly. No speculation, no narrative." "That's all I've done." Hale hesitated, then added, "If another clearance like this appears, inform me first, before control." The guard registered the instruction. It shifted the chain subtly, not officially, practically. "Yes, sir." Hale turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, not looking back, "you weren't wrong to act." The guard did not respond. He watched Hale disappear into the corridor, authority retreating into structure. As night settled in again, the guard resumed his quiet vigilance. The logs updated. The feeds remained live. The nursery stayed sealed. No new clearances appeared, but the guard understood now that authority did not always arrive with footsteps or voices. Sometimes it moved as an absence, 5 minutes here, 2 minutes there, just enough to bend reality without leaving a mark. He adjusted his monitoring parameters, narrowing thresholds, tightening alerts. If authority intended to remain unseen, it would have to work harder. And if it touched the child again, the guard would notice. He always did.
The alert did not sound. It manifested instead as a compression of data, several small changes occurring within the same minute, none severe enough on their own to trigger escalation. The guard noticed because he had adjusted his thresholds. He had narrowed the margins until coincidence became visible. At 2138, the nursery's environmental system shifted by half a degree, a minor correction, easily explained. At 2139, the audio monitor registered a brief dip in sensitivity, then returned to baseline. At 2140, a senior administrative clearance queued, validated, and expired in under 90 seconds. No doors opened. No cameras froze. Nothing happened. The guard leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the display. The palace was quiet again, entering the shallow stillness that preceded full night posture. Staff transitions had completed. The corridors belonged to security now. He brought up the child's live telemetry. Heart rate steady, respiration shallow but regular. Sleep state indicated light rest, normal given the earlier disruption. Still, the timing pressed. He checked the clearance metadata, same validating authority, same abstraction, different access scope this time, broader but shorter. A probe. He routed the data to a secondary buffer, isolating it from central review, not hidden, just delayed, enough to let him see what followed. At 2141, a maintenance request populated the system, service wing lighting adjustment, routine, automated. The guard stood. He did not move toward the nursery immediately. Time pressure did not mean haste, it meant prioritization. He crossed the corridor to the auxiliary terminal and initiated a silent check of the service wing sensors. All nominal. No motion, no door cycles. And yet the pattern was tightening again. Shorter windows, cleaner execution. Whoever was acting had learned from the previous disruption, reduced exposure, reduced trace. He opened a channel to Commander Hale, direct. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm seeing compressed administrative activity intersecting the nursery systems. No breach yet. Pattern suggests preparation." Hale responded after a beat. "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir." Another pause. "Control doesn't see it." "They won't, not at this resolution." Silence, then. "What are you recommending?" The guard considered the question carefully. Recommendation carried weight. Weight created accountability. "Increased physical presence, on-site, not remote." Hale exhaled audibly. "That will raise flags. So will another incident," the guard said. Hale did not answer immediately. The guard watched the clock advance by seconds, each one tightening the window. At 21:43, the nursery audio feed dipped again, brief, subtle, less than a second. The guard's jaw set. "Sir," he said, "they're testing limits." Hale's reply came sharper this time. "Hold your position. I'm rerouting patrol." The guard acknowledged, though his eyes never left the screen. Patrol rerouting took time. Boots had to move through space. Authority, again, moved faster than bodies. At 21:44, the clearance appeared again. This time, it did not expire. Immediately, the clearance expanded, branching into nested permissions, door control, camera priority, environmental override, all temporary, all clean. The guard felt the compression become urgency. He keyed his recorder to full capture and stood fully upright. "Active senior clearance on nursery systems," he said into the channel. "Scope expanding. Confirmed. Patrol is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes was an eternity at this scale. The nursery audio feed went flat. Not muted, not cut. Flat. No ambient noise, no ventilation hum, no movement, as if the room itself had been wrapped. The guard moved. He did not run. He crossed the corridor in long, controlled strides, arriving at the door in seconds. The access panel glowed amber, then shifted toward green, transitioning. Someone was opening it remotely. "Countermanding," the guard said, and placed his hand on the panel, initiating local control. The system resisted briefly, authority pushing back, then stalled. "Control 3, cut in, overlapping Hale. You are interfering with a senior operation." The guard did not respond to control. He spoke to Hale instead. "Sir, clearance is active without presence. Audio is suppressed. I am at the door." A pause, then Hale's voice, lower, stripped of procedural padding. "Do what you have to do." The words landed heavily. The panel chimed, signaling impending unlock. The guard disengaged it manually, severing remote input. The system protested, warnings stacking in his peripheral display, but complied. He placed his hand on the door. It was warm again. Inside, something shifted. Not a cry, not a voice, a sharp intake of breath, controlled too late. The guard did not announce himself this time. He did not wait. He forced the door open. Light spilled into the corridor, breaking the artificial quiet. The nursery revealed itself in fragments, cot, chair, wall panel ajar, and a figure standing too close to the child. The guard stepped through the threshold, body already moving to interpose, protocol collapsing behind instinct once more as time ran out. The guard crossed the threshold with deliberate speed, placing his body between the figure and the cot before his mind finished cataloging details. Proximity came first, space denied, control reasserted. The figure froze. Not startled, checked, a pause measured in training, not fear. The nursery lights were dimmed to night mode, amber and low, casting soft shadows that disguised edges. The guard registered the figure's outline, adult male, tailored jacket beneath a medical overlayer that had never belonged in this wing. No visible insignia, hands empty, too clean. The child lay rigid in the cot, eyes open, breath shallow.
One hand clenched the blanket near her chest, knuckles pale. "Step away," the guard said. His voice was even, not loud. It did not need to be. The man did not move immediately. His gaze flicked past the guard to the door panel, then back. Calculation, not confusion. "You're early," the man said quietly. The guard ignored the remark. He shifted half a step sideways, widening his stance so his shoulder blocked the cot completely. He could feel the child's warmth at his back, a fragile heat against his uniform. "Identify yourself," the guard said. The man's lips pressed together. "You already know my clearance." "I don't see your presence," the guard replied. "That's intentional." The guard noted the lack of denial. He raised his wrist slightly, ensuring the recorder was visible. The red indicator pulsed steadily. "Who authorized access?" the guard asked. The man exhaled, slow, controlled. "You're out of position. This is not your decision." The guard felt the nursery door behind him shift as the system attempted to reassert control. He ignored it, grounding himself in the physical space. Stone floor, warm air, the faint smell of antiseptic mixed with something metallic again. The man took a step forward. The guard mirrored it instantly, closing the distance just enough to make contact unavoidable if the man continued. Not a threat, a boundary. "Do not approach," the guard said. The man stopped. His eyes flicked to the cot, then away. "The child needs to be moved." "Medical staff would announce that," the guard replied. "This is not medical." The admission hung in the air. Behind them, the nursery audio feed crackled back to life, ambient noise flooding in as the guard's forced entry disrupted suppression. The sound of the child's breathing filled the room, uneven, restrained, real. The guard felt something settle in his chest, not relief, confirmation. "Step back," he said again. The man hesitated longer this time. "You're creating a record you can't control." "I'm creating one you can't erase." The man's jaw tightened. He took one step backward. The guard did not relax. "Hands where I can see them," he said. The man complied, slowly raising his hands to chest height. No weapon, no device visible. That absence troubled the guard more than the presence would have. "Who sent you?" the guard asked. The man's eyes hardened. "You don't want that answer." The guard did not respond. He reached back with one hand without turning and rested it lightly against the cot rail, grounding the child, letting her feel contact without drawing attention to it. She flinched, then stilled. Footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor outside, security still distant. The man lowered his hands slightly. "You're delaying something inevitable." The guard's eyes never left him. "So are you." The man's gaze shifted again, this time toward the wall panel the guard had noticed earlier. The seam was visible now that the light angle had changed, a vertical line no wider than a finger. The guard followed the glance. "Don't," the man said quietly. The guard stepped sideways, keeping himself between the man and the cot while angling closer to the panel. He pressed the release. The panel slid open with a muted hiss, revealing the same narrow service access he had seen the night before. Cool air spilled into the nursery, carrying the faint echo of distant movement, guards approaching fast now. The man exhaled sharply. "You've complicated this." "I'm exploiting it," the guard replied. The man straightened, abandoning pretense. "This child is leverage." The word landed heavily, precise and ugly. The guard felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. "She's under my protection. For now, but you can't protect her from what she represents." The guard did not engage the abstraction. He reached back again, this time lifting the child gently from the cot. She stiffened at first, then clung to his shoulder instinctively, her breath quickening but audible. He adjusted his grip, supporting her weight carefully, turning his body so that his back shielded her completely. The man watched, expression unreadable. "You think this ends here? I know it does, tonight." The nursery door burst open as 2 armed guards entered, weapons low but ready. Commander Hale followed seconds later, eyes taking in the scene in a single sweep. The open panel, the man, the child in the guard's arms. "Secure him," Hale said. The guards moved immediately, flanking the man, hands firm on his arms. He did not resist. Hale stepped closer to the guard. His gaze flipped briefly to the child, then back up. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head once, small and decisive, then buried her face against the guard's shoulder. Hale's mouth tightened. "Medical," Hale ordered, "now, and lock this wing down." As the room filled with controlled movement, the guard remained still until the medic reached for the child. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before transferring her carefully, ensuring her hands released him rather than being pulled away. She looked back once. He nodded. As she was carried out, the guard felt the weight leave his arms, replaced by something heavier, settling elsewhere. Hale turned to him. "You crossed the threshold again." "Yes, sir." Hale held his gaze. "And you were right." The guard said nothing. Behind them, the service panel remained open, a narrow wound in the nursery wall, evidence that authority had tried to move unseen and failed. This time.
The lockdown initiated in layers. First, the doors, heavy, recessed panels sliding into place at the ends of the corridor with a low mechanical thud. Then the systems, feeds rerouted, access privileges suspended, environmental controls isolated to internal command. The palace knew how to close itself when ordered. It did so without drama. The guard stood just inside the nursery while the rest of the response unfolded around him. The space felt altered now, stripped of its quiet pretense. Light levels rose incrementally as emergency protocol overrode night settings. Corners sharpened. Details emerged that dimness had hidden. The cot was scuffed along one rail, a faint mark where something hard had pressed against it. The chair beside it was angled wrong, one leg slightly lifted from the floor. Near the service panel, the rug edge was folded back, revealing the seam more clearly than before. Nothing catastrophic, nothing benign. Commander Hale supervised the securing of the man with concise gestures, no raised voice, no unnecessary movement. The man's posture remained upright, almost cooperative as restraints were applied. His expression suggested calculation had merely shifted phase. "Identity," Hale said. The man provided a name. It was real. The guard recognized it from administrative rosters, senior liaison, external advisory role, rarely on site. "Clearance?" Hale asked. "Valid," the man replied, "at the time." Hale nodded slightly, as if that answer confirmed something he already knew. Not anymore. The man glanced toward the guard. "You're still thinking in doors and logs," he said. "This doesn't end with me." The guard did not respond. He was scanning the room again, slower now, letting the aftermath speak. Forced entry always left residue, not just physical, but procedural, a rupture that systems rushed to seal. A medic returned briefly to collect a small monitoring device from the cot. As she moved, the guard noticed a thin adhesive patch on the sheet, half removed, its sensor filament cut cleanly. "Document that," he said quietly. She nodded without comment. Hale turned back to him once the man was escorted out. "You overrode a senior clearance and physically intervened." "Yes, sir." "You forced entry twice in under 24 hours." "Yes, sir." Hale studied him, weighing response against result. "Do you understand how close this came to being framed as an internal security failure?" "Yes, and that you would have been the failure point." The guard met his eyes. "I would have accepted that." Hale's mouth tightened. "That's not how this institution survives." "No, it's how the child did." Silence followed, not charged but dense. Hale looked away first. "There will be consequences," he said, "formal ones." "Yes, sir." "And informal," Hale added. The guard nodded once. He had already accounted for both. The initial reports were compiled before midnight. The guard was present for none of it. He was reassigned temporarily to a holding post overlooking the inner courtyard, a place used when personnel needed to be visible but removed from active operations. The air there was cooler, the space open, stone radiating the day's stored warmth back into the night. From where he stood, he could see the upper windows of the residential wing. Lights moved behind some of them. Medics, aides, quiet activity restoring order. The nursery window remained dark. He checked his internal display once more. The child's monitor pinged steady, now routed through medical oversight. Heart rate slightly elevated, respiration uneven but improving. Alive, present, audible. That mattered more than the rest. Footsteps approached behind him. He did not turn immediately. "You forced the issue," Hale said, stopping beside him. "Yes, sir." Hale leaned against the stone railing, posture less rigid now. "They won't say it aloud," he continued, "but you introduced friction. I introduced verification." Hale huffed softly, almost a laugh. "You're not wrong. That's the problem." They stood in silence for several seconds, the courtyard below empty, fountains stilled for the night. "The inquiry will focus on you, not them. I know. They'll argue necessity, discretion, long-term stability, and I'll argue sequence." Hale looked at him then, something like respect surfacing briefly before being pushed back under command. "You're consistent, I'll give you that." A message pinged on the guard's display. Medical update. The child had fallen asleep, deeper this time, natural. The guard exhaled slowly, a release he did not realize he had been holding. "Get some rest while you can." "Yes, sir." Hale turned to leave, then paused. "If you hadn't forced that door," he said quietly, "we'd be having a very different conversation." The guard watched him go. Above them, the palace settled again, systems recalibrating, narratives forming. Forced entry would be reframed as exception, not precedent. Authority would adjust, not concede. But somewhere inside, a service panel remained exposed, its existence now documented, its use no longer invisible. The guard remained at his post, eyes on the windows, listening to the night reclaim its quiet. Forced entry had broken more than a door. It had broken the assumption that authority could move unseen. And that, he knew, would not be forgiven easily.
The nursery was entered again at 0140. This time, no alarms resisted, no authority pushed back. The systems yielded cleanly, as if relieved to be aligned. The guard stepped inside alone. The room felt smaller than it had earlier, though nothing had changed. The lights were set to full now, washing the walls in neutral white, stripping away the softness designed for sleep. In that clarity, the nursery revealed itself not as a sanctuary, but as a space that had been used. He closed the door behind him and stood still for several seconds, letting the room settle. Silence returned, but it was a different silence now, empty rather than suppressed. He began at the threshold. The floor showed faint scuffing just inside the door, a shallow arc consistent with a pivot under load, adult weight, not hurried, intentional.
He followed the marks inward, tracking them without crouching, letting his eyes do the work. The cot was centered beneath the window as protocol required. Its rails were intact. The mattress lay flat, but the fitted sheet was misaligned by several centimeters, pulled tight at one corner and loose at the other. A small thing, a sign of interruption. He ran his gloved fingers lightly along the rail. A faint residue came away, clear, slightly tacky, adhesive, medical grade. The monitoring patch the medic had removed earlier had not failed on its own. He moved to the chair. One leg bore a shallow scrape, fresh. The chair had been dragged closer to the cot, not for comfort, but for access. Someone had needed height, leverage. The guard straightened slowly. He crossed to the wall panel again. The service access remained open, sealed only by temporary measures. Inside, the passage was dark now, inactive, but the air beyond still carried the trace of movement, disturbed dust, a faint warmth that had not yet dissipated. He did not enter. This chapter was not pursuit, it was reconstruction. He returned to the cot and knelt, bringing himself to the child's height. The blanket lay folded neatly at the foot, too neatly, not the careless tangle of a restless sleeper, but the order of someone who had wanted the space clear. He imagined the sequence without dramatizing it, a presence entering quietly, a hand adjusting the blanket, a voice low, controlled, instructing silence, a child old enough to comply, frightened enough to obey. No struggle, no noise, compliance engineered. The guard stood. On the far side of the room, near the shelving unit, a toy lay on the floor, a small wooden animal, smoothed from handling. It should have been in the cot. It had been moved deliberately, placed out of reach. He picked it up and weighed it in his palm. Light, familiar, the kind of object a child used to anchor herself when unsettled. He placed it back where it belonged. The nursery had not been breached violently. It had been managed. That realization settled heavier than any sign of force. The guard activated his recorder again, switching to a low, continuous capture. He spoke only when necessary, his voice steady, observational. Nursery interior shows evidence of controlled access, no forced damage. Environmental manipulation confirmed. Child compliance induced. He moved to the terminal mounted discreetly near the cot and accessed its local buffer. Unlike central systems, it retained raw data longer. He scrolled through sensor logs manually, ignoring the summarized outputs. At 2142, the audio suppression began, gradual, stepped down in increments small enough to evade alert thresholds. At 2143, the cot sensor registered a pressure shift, adult weight distributed briefly across the mattress edge. At 2144, the child's movement spiked, then flattened. The guard closed his eyes for a moment, not to imagine, but to anchor himself against it. He continued. The log showed no distress flags, no elevated heart rate, no sudden motion. The system had been designed to interpret compliance as safety. He backed out of the terminal and scanned the room once more, slower now, committing every detail to memory. He would be asked later what he saw, what he inferred, what he assumed. He separated those categories carefully in his mind. What he saw, order disturbed by intention. What he inferred, authority present without care. What he assumed, nothing. The door behind him opened quietly. Commander Hale entered, followed by an internal affairs officer he did not recognize. Both stopped just inside the threshold. "You're thorough," Hale said. "It matters," the guard replied. The officer looked around the room,
taking notes mentally. No signs of struggle, he observed. No, the guard agreed. That's the concern. Hale glanced at the toy now back in the cot. You think she cooperated? I think she was instructed and understood the cost of not doing so. The officer's expression tightened slightly. That will be difficult to formalize. I know, the guard said. Hale looked at him. This room tells a story they won't want recorded. Then it should be, the guard replied. Silence followed, heavier than before. Hale nodded once. Finish your documentation. The guard watched them leave, then turned back to the nursery one last time. The space was quiet again, restored in appearance if not in truth. Fresh sheets would be placed, sensors recalibrated. The room would return to its purpose. But the guard knew now that protection was not just about preventing entry. It was about recognizing when authority entered softly and stopping it anyway. He shut off the recorder and closed the nursery door behind him, sealing it properly this time. The interior was no longer a mystery. It was evidence.
The service access was narrower than it appeared from the nursery side. The guard entered alone, sealing the panel behind him with a controlled slide that muted the sound to a soft breath of air. The passage accepted him without resistance, lights rising incrementally as his presence was detected. Utility-grade illumination revealed stone worn smooth by decades of use, conduit lines strapped tight against the walls, and a floor sloped just enough to carry water away from living spaces. This corridor was not forgotten, it was merely unacknowledged. He paused 2 steps in, letting his eyes adjust, then lowered his gaze to the floor. Dust lay thin and even, except where it had been disturbed. 2 sets of prints overlapping briefly, then separating. Adult footwear, 1 set heavier, consistent with a carried load. The pattern angled away from the nursery and deeper into the service network. He followed. The air cooled as he moved, the warmth of the nursery falling behind him. Here, the palace shed ceremony entirely. This was infrastructure, maintenance arteries, built to move people and objects unseen. He counted junctions as he passed them, marking distances automatically. At the first crossway, he stopped. To the left, the passage rose toward administrative offices. To the right, it descended toward storage and logistics. Straight ahead, it narrowed, lights dimmer, walls older. The prince went straight. He advanced cautiously, not because he expected resistance, but because he expected design. Hidden passages were built with intention, not improvisation. They guided movement subtly, angles that discouraged running, turns that blocked long sight lines, alcoves that swallowed sound. At the second bend, he found the first modification. A small sensor housing had been installed recently, its casing a shade lighter than the stone around it. Not standard palace issue. The wiring fed into the wall through a clean cut, sealed expertly. He scanned it. The sensor was passive, motion agnostic. It registered only presence duration, not identity. A counter, not a camera. How long, not who. He logged it and moved on. The passage ended at a reinforced door marked with an old service glyph, half worn away. Beyond it lay a secondary logistics corridor, wider, taller, designed for carts and crates. The guard stopped short of the threshold and listened. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, but not near. The corridor was active now, but not busy. He opened the door and stepped through. This space bore signs of recent use, wheel marks faint but fresh, a crate pushed aside and not realigned, a wall panel ajar. He followed the path without touching anything, reading the story left behind. The child had not been taken far. She had been repositioned. The logistics corridor branched into 3 directions. The guard did not hesitate.
He followed the branch that led toward the old council wing, a part of the palace no longer used for formal gatherings, but still maintained. It was close enough to authority to feel protected, distant enough to avoid scrutiny. Halfway down, he found the holding room. It was not labeled as such. The door bore only a maintenance code and a pressure seal. Inside, the space was clean, climate-controlled, furnished sparsely with a chair, a low table, and a wall-mounted monitor. No restraints, no medical equipment, nothing overtly threatening. And yet, the air felt wrong. He stepped inside and closed the door. The room registered his presence, lights rising smoothly. He stood still, scanning. The chair had been moved closer to the wall. The table bore a faint ring where a cup had rested briefly. On the floor, a small indentation marked where someone had knelt. Child height. He knelt himself, aligning his perspective. From here, the monitor would have been at eye level. The chair loomed larger, the room enclosing. The guard exhaled slowly. This was where silence had been maintained. He checked the monitor. It was powered but inactive now. He accessed its buffer. Unlike palace systems, this one was local, isolated. Whoever had installed it expected discretion, not oversight. The buffer held no video, only audio. He did not play it. He documented its existence, its configuration, its connection points. He photographed the room with his internal recorder, capturing angles, distances, the absence of overt harm. Then he backed out, sealing the door behind him. In the corridor, he encountered Commander Hale and two internal affairs officers approaching at a controlled pace. They stopped when they saw his expression. "You found something," Hale said. "Yes, sir." He led them to the door and stepped aside. Hale entered first, scanning quickly. One officer followed, then the other. No one spoke for several seconds. "This wasn't improvisation," Hale said quietly. "No," the guard replied. "It was prepared." One of the officers gestured to the monitor. "Is there content?" "There was," the guard said. "Not anymore." Hale nodded once, accepting the implication. This corridor wasn't meant to be noticed. It was meant to be reliable, the guard said. They stood in silence again, the weight of what the room represented settling in. Not violence, not chaos, control. Hale turned to the guard. "Your documentation will be critical." "Yes, sir." "And contested," Hale added. The guard met his eyes. "Then it should be precise." Hale gave a small, tired nod. "You've changed the scope of this." "I followed the path," the guard replied. As they left the holding room and sealed it under formal lock, the guard felt the palace adjust around them. Systems reclassified, access revoked, narratives shifting to contain damage. The hidden passage was no longer hidden. It had been mapped, logged, named. And once named, it could not be denied. The guard returned to the main corridor with the others, aware that the story was no longer just about a child moved in silence. It was about a structure built to make silence usable, and now exposed. The service wing had changed character by the time they returned. What had once felt peripheral, quiet corridors, neutral lighting, unremarkable doors, now carried density. Personnel moved with purpose, voices low, expressions guarded. The palace had shifted into containment mode, the phase that followed exposure but preceded admission. The guard walked slightly behind Commander Hale, not as deference but alignment. Internal affairs flanked them, their presence formalizing what had already become inevitable. The hidden passage, the holding room, the altered logs, each piece had tightened the narrative whether the institution accepted it or not. They stopped at a junction where the service wing met administrative access. The air here was warmer, filtered differently. This was where unseen roots touched visible power. "He'll be here," Hale said quietly. The guard did not ask who. He already knew. The senior official emerged moments later from a side corridor, unhurried, attire immaculate, expression composed in a way that suggested rehearsal rather than calm. He acknowledged Hale with a nod, then turned his attention to the guard. "You've been active," the official said. "I've been observant," the guard replied. The official smiled faintly. "Observation is not authority." "No," the guard agreed, "but it informs action." Hale stepped between them slightly, not to block, but to structure the space. "We've identified unauthorized use of service infrastructure," he said, "including child relocation." The official's expression did not change. "The term unauthorized is flexible." "Not in this context," Hale replied. The guard watched the exchange closely. Authority misuse rarely announced itself with aggression. It arrived with language, softened definitions, widened margins. "The child was never in danger," the official said. "She was safeguarded from instability." The guard spoke then, voice level. "She was removed from her bed without record, silenced, and placed in a controlled environment designed to avoid detection." The official turned fully toward him. "You're extrapolating." "I'm describing," the guard said. Silence stretched. The service wing hummed around them, systems indifferent to hierarchy. "You understand," the official said, "that some decisions are made to protect the continuity of the institution, and some institutions forget what they're protecting," the guard replied. Hale inhaled sharply, then steadied himself. "We're not debating philosophy," he said. "We're addressing conduct." The official's gaze flicked to Hale. "Then you should be careful how far you let this go." The implication was clear. So was the threat. The guard did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood, presence steady, refusing to yield ground. Internal Affairs stepped forward then, quiet but decisive. "We'll need to escort you," one of them said to the official, "for formal statement." The official's smile thinned. "On what charge?" "On deviation," the officer replied, "and concealment." The word concealment settled heavily in the air. The official looked back at the guard. "You think you've won something. I think the child is sleeping in her bed. That's enough." For the first time, something flickered behind the official's composure, irritation perhaps, or calculation recalibrating too late. "This will not end well for you," the official said quietly. The guard met his gaze. "It already didn't," he replied. Hale turned away, signaling the end of the exchange. The Internal Affairs officers positioned themselves, not forcibly, but firmly. The official adjusted his cuffs, straightened his jacket, and allowed himself to be escorted down the corridor. As they disappeared from view, Hale remained still for several seconds. "You understand what you've done," Hale said finally, without looking at the guard. "Yes, sir." "You've placed a spotlight where there wasn't one." "Yes, sir." "And you've made enemies." The guard nodded once. "I didn't choose them." Hale turned then, studying him with an expression that mixed fatigue and reluctant respect. "No, you revealed them." A message pinged on the guard's display, medical update. The child had woken briefly, disoriented, then settled again after reassurance, no lingering distress noted. The guard exhaled slowly. "Go," Hale said. "We'll handle the rest." The guard stepped back, then turned and walked away from the service wing, his boots echoing softly against stone. Behind him, authority regrouped, narratives reassembled, consequences prepared. Ahead of him, the palace corridors stretched on, unchanged in appearance, altered in truth. The confrontation had ended without raised voices or visible force, but something fundamental had shifted. Authority had been challenged, not by rebellion, but by presence, and that, the guard knew, was harder to erase. The recovery did not end with the child returned to her bed. That was the visible part, the part the palace could accept without argument. A child sleeping, medical staff satisfied, no immediate harm to explain away. The systems favored that conclusion. It allowed momentum to resume. The record was something else. The guard was assigned a temporary workspace adjacent to internal review, a narrow room with a desk, a terminal, and no window. The light was neutral and constant, designed to remove any sense of time passing. He sat alone, uniform still on, posture unchanged. He began at the beginning, not with conclusions, but with sequence, timestamps first, exact minutes, seconds where relevant. He listed the unsealed door, the missing log entry, the first audio suppression, the administrative clearance without presence. He cross-referenced each with system outputs, attaching raw data rather than summaries. He wrote slowly, not out of caution, but precision. Language mattered here. Words could either clarify or blur. He chose those that could not be easily softened. When he reached the nursery interior, he described only what could be verified: displaced objects, adhesive residue, sensor interference. He did not write what he imagined the child had felt. That belonged elsewhere. The holding room took longer. He described its dimensions, its equipment, its isolation from central systems. He included the absence of restraints, the absence of visible threat. He knew how that would be read. Control without marks was harder to argue against than violence. He attached images, sensor logs, authorization chains. He highlighted the pattern: short windows, remote clearance, suppression without shutdown. At no point did he assign motive. He concluded the initial report with a single sentence: child recovered unharmed, risk mitigated by physical intervention. He saved the draft but did not submit it yet. Instead, he opened a secondary document. This one was addressed to Commander Hale only. In it, he outlined the implications, not accusations, consequences, how the existence of a prepared holding space suggested precedent, how the manipulation of compliance thresholds could be replicated, how silence had been used as a tool, not an absence. He ended with a recommendation: no child-accessible area should accept remote authority without verified presence. He sent that document. Then he waited. The response came in fragments. Medical cleared the child fully by mid-morning. No sedation beyond standard dosage. No signs of physical distress. Behavioral assessment inconclusive. She was quiet, observant, compliant. That alone would not be flagged. The guard read the note without comment. Internal Affairs acknowledged receipt of his report, but returned it once, requesting clarification of interpretive language. He adjusted nothing. He resubmitted with the same wording, adding only additional data references. Commander Hale arrived in person shortly after. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment without speaking. The room felt smaller with him in it, authority filling the space not by force, but by weight. "They're pushing back," Hale said. "I expected that," the guard replied. "They're focusing on outcome," Hale continued. "Unharmed child, no visible abuse, no unauthorized extraction beyond temporary relocation." "And the method?" the guard asked. Hale looked at him. "That's where your record matters." The guard nodded once. "They want to compartmentalize," Hale said. "Call it an isolated lapse, attribute it to one individual." "It wasn't," the guard said. "No," Hale agreed. "It wasn't." Hale stepped closer to the desk and glanced at the open report. "This will trigger policy review, quietly, slowly. Slow is acceptable, silent isn't." Hale almost smiled at that, but the expression didn't fully form. "There will be cost," he said. "I know." "Your career won't end," Hale said, "but it won't advance cleanly either." The guard absorbed that without visible reaction. "I didn't act for advancement." "I know," Hale said again. This time the words carried something heavier. A message chimed softly on the terminal. Update from internal systems. The service passages connected to the nursery had been reclassified. Access restricted. Physical escort required. Remote clearance disabled. A small change, structural. The guard looked at it for a long moment. "Was that your recommendation?" Hale asked. "Yes." Hale nodded. They implemented it. The guard exhaled slowly. Not relief, closure of one loop. "What happens to the official?" the guard asked. Hale's expression hardened slightly. "Reassignment, advisory review, no public record." "No children?" the guard asked. "None," Hale replied. That mattered.
Hale turned to leave, then paused at the door. You did more than recover a child. You forced the institution to write something down it preferred to forget. The guard did not respond. When Hale left, the guard submitted the final report. The record locked. It would be cited, challenged, reframed, but it would exist. And somewhere in the palace, a child's room remained sealed, monitored, and, this time, accounted for. Recovery had been achieved. The record ensured it could not be undone quietly. The aftermath did not announce itself. There was no formal reprimand delivered in person, no public commendation, no immediate reassignment that could be pointed to and named. Instead, the palace adjusted around the guard in subtle administrative ways that only someone inside the system would recognize. His name disappeared from shortlists, not removed, just no longer selected. Shift assignments changed. He was placed consistently in visible posts, ceremonial routes, high-traffic corridors, where vigilance was valued, but intervention was unlikely. He remained a royal guard in full standing, uniform unaltered, authority intact. On paper, nothing had been taken from him. In practice, everything had been slowed. He accepted it without comment. The inquiry concluded within a week. Its findings were distributed in controlled language, procedural ambiguity identified, remote authorization protocols under review, individual initiative noted. No single sentence captured the truth, but enough of them together formed a shadow of it. The guard read the summary once and archived it. He returned to his duties with the same measured precision. He checked seals, he logged transitions, he watched doors the way others watched people. His presence remained calm, unremarkable, professional. But others noticed. Junior guards began to ask quieter questions during rotations, not about what had happened, never that, but about how to notice things sooner, what to look for when systems said everything was fine. He answered carefully, always in process, never in story. Trust the sequence, he would say. Notice what's missing. Silence isn't neutral. No one quoted him, but they listened. The child did not appear in public for some time. When she did, it was brief, an appearance at a window, a formal photograph released with careful framing. She looked smaller than before, more watchful. The guard saw her once from a distance, walking with an aide through a sunlit corridor. She stopped when she noticed him, her steps slowing. Their eyes met for a moment. She did not smile. She nodded. He returned the gesture, subtle enough to go unnoticed by anyone else. That was all. Months passed. Policy updates circulated quietly through the ranks. Remote clearance thresholds tightened. Physical presence verification became mandatory in residential zones. Service passages were audited, some sealed entirely, others brought into formal maps for the first time in decades. None of the changes referenced a child, none mentioned a guard, but the structure shifted. The guard remained where he was, no longer advancing, no longer stalled, fixed, reliable, a known quantity. That, he understood, was both limitation and shield. One evening, long after the incident had been absorbed into institutional memory, Commander Hale joined him briefly at a perimeter post. The courtyard was empty, the air cool, the palace lit in restrained amber. "They still cite your report," Hale said, eyes forward, "when it's useful." The guard nodded, "and ignore it when it isn't." Hale allowed a thin smile. "That's how institutions survive." "And fail," the guard replied evenly. Hale did not disagree. "You'd do it again," Hale said. "Yes." Hale glanced at him. "Even knowing the cost?" The guard considered the question, though he already knew the answer. He thought of the nursery, the service corridor, the holding room built to look harmless, the silence engineered to pass as safety. "I already paid it," he said. Hale exhaled slowly. "That child will grow up protected by changes she'll never know your name for."
"That's acceptable," the guard replied. They stood in silence after that, the kind that did not need filling. When Hale left, the guard remained at his post, eyes tracking the palace's steady rhythms. Doors opened and closed, lights shifted, logs updated. Everything appeared normal. But somewhere in the system, a record existed that could not be fully erased, a sequence of events written plainly, without embellishment, by someone who had noticed a door ajar and refused to ignore it. The guard adjusted his stance as the night deepened. Protocol still mattered. So did instinct. The difference now was that the palace had been forced, however briefly, to acknowledge the space between them and the cost of pretending it did not exist.